So, who here will read the headline of a news article and then go and tell someone, oh yeah, I saw that on the news? I'm sure there are more than a few guilty parties here, and no judgment, it doesn't even seem like the wrong thing to do. More often than not, the most important piece of a news article is given away in the headline anyways. Way back in the day of print newspapers, it didn't really matter if you read the whole piece or not. The article was right underneath the headline, and you were kind of already bought in. Nowadays, in the increasingly fragmented era of online news, why would you click on a news article, or watch a news report, or engage in any piece of journalism, when the most important part can be consumed with a mere glance? This is one of the major issues facing the modern journalism industry. It's also not really a new issue. About 10 years ago, I worked for a new media company based in Montreal. The founders had something of a solution. Take the news, share it on social media, but make the headline mysterious or sexy enough that people felt like they had to click. In other words, we had entered the era of clickbait. You know the format: this one trick will save you hours every day, or this man discovered the life hack to a deep sleep. Way back then, though, we were taking local news articles and giving them the clickbait treatment. Because when faced between the choice of this versus this, which one are you going to click on? What about these? Now, I'm not exactly proud of this era of my journalism career, effectively repackaging the work of local reporters while I sat behind the screen, not really offering much outside of a catchy headline. But I do think the founders' strategy had value. They knew their core audience, they knew where to find them online, and they knew how to make otherwise boring content seem relevant. Maybe most importantly, for an organization of that size, it also made money. Those revenue streams, however, were predicated on having as much fresh, new content as possible. And back then, in those early days, I was the main and pretty much only full-time writer. So it fell on me to create new content, to get more clicks, to get more views, to make more money. So I furiously typed away at my keyboard, taking press releases as given fact, never having time to fact-check or edit, and not getting paid all that well to do it. Unfortunately, that's also the working reality for many journalists today. Quality reporting, where you're on the ground gleaning new insights you can't get from a headline alone, is becoming rarer and rarer in Canada. That's largely because of dwindling resources for news outlets, and that's having a direct impact on the news itself, their core product. Which brings me to my next question for all of you. Is the general public, or you, willing to stop being a simple consumer of the news and start being a customer? In the age of misinformation, can you put a price on reliable, accurate information? And if so, how much are you willing to pay? I'm Michael Delamonte, and I am a recovering journalist. Recovering because being a journalist, a reporter, is something of a lifestyle. It's one you hold really close to your heart, and it's hard to let it go, especially after working so hard to get there. I got my master's in journalism, largely to get a gig in the more formal news industry. I spent the last 7 years as an on-camera reporter and news anchor out in Winnipeg. Don't be too impressed, it's just Winnipeg. But even just by me mentioning the terms TV reporter or news anchor, some images probably popped up into your mind. Maybe it's the faces of overly groomed people in blazers. Maybe it's a breaking news van pulling up to the scene. Or maybe it's something a little bit more chill, but no less glamorous. Well, I can tell you, at the local level, all of that is far more in the realm of fiction than it is reality. There is no hair and makeup, you don't have a team to help you crank out a story, and you're always under a time crunch. Why? Because the news doesn't make money like it used to. I don't need to tell anyone here that most media content, news or otherwise, happens online these days. It's just harder for large organizations, large news organizations, to fund all of their operations with online ads alone. That's especially when you compare it to the money that commercials used to bring in, or even newspaper ads. When I was working as a news producer, I worked on a politics show out in Ottawa. You know what I noticed? All of the commercials in between our show were for life insurance, or MedAlert bracelets, or chairs for your shower. To put it bluntly, they were commercials for old people, the only demographic that still reliably watches the news on television. Younger, growing audiences are going online, where it's simply harder to make money off of viewers. Now, I'm not really saying anything profound here. These are issues that every legacy news organization is finding these days. How to have a sustainable revenue model in the online era. And legacy news organizations like where I worked are trying to increase their online presence. In the meantime, though, to make up on that lost money, they're cutting costs in other ways and finding efficiencies. And that is creating a climate in Canadian journalism, especially at the local level, where it is getting harder and harder to do your job. Let me explain a little bit further. Over the last decade or so, traditional roles at TV news stations started being replaced by what's now become an industry norm, the video journalist. What is a video journalist? Well, it's the job I took when I left Ottawa to move to Winnipeg and start my on-camera career. It's also the combination of 3 jobs into one: reporter, camera operator, and video editor. That means in the span of a day, you're responsible for reporting your own story, getting all your own visuals, editing it for TV, plus getting all of your sources and speakers, and then you're expected to write a version for online as well. Seems like a lot to do in a day, I know, because it is. Here is an example of a story I did in 2021. Manitoba hockey tournament canceled due to COVID transmission concerns. Not exactly groundbreaking journalism here, and it seems like the story came together relatively fine. What a viewer wouldn't know is, I was assigned this news of the day story relatively late in the day, around noon if I remember correctly, forcing me to hurriedly drive to a Manitoba community I had never been to, report on a story I knew nothing about, nor really cared about, and in winter conditions, stand in the cold, wet parking lot of a local grocery store, begging strangers to lend me their voices. Needless to say, it was tough, exhausting work. The story came together relatively fine, as I mentioned, and I made my deadline, 6 p.m. for the local news broadcast. But the experience stuck with me, because who would want to put in all of that effort to do something they didn't really care about under those conditions and time constraints, with the expectation just to do it all over again the next day? It is no surprise then that journalists face intense burnout. A study of over 1,200 Canadian media workers found over 69% of them experienced anxiety, 46% reported symptoms of depression, and 15% reported symptoms consistent with PTSD. I didn't partake in that report, but I was certainly among that number. In the summer of 2022, I had to take an extended mental health leave from work. I basically stopped sleeping for almost a year. My mind always racing with all the things I had to do at work. Anxious thoughts keeping me up at night of maybe getting sent on a story that I would have to do across the province without enough time or resources to do the job that I thought I was supposed to love. Obviously, my mental state suffered, so did my work. I cared less, didn't have the energy to follow up on stories or chase down leads, and I adopted an "it's fine as long as it gets done" mentality. I am sure a lot of other reporters have felt the same. I did return to my Winnipeg newsroom after my leave, 3 months, thankfully with changes to my workflow. Credit to very sympathetic bosses, I didn't have to work video journalist shifts anymore. For folks still in the news game, it doesn't look like things are getting any better. TV stations and other outlets are now hiring for multimedia content creators or multi-skilled journalists. What exactly does a broad title like that mean? Well, think all the responsibilities of a journalist on top of the added expectation to produce more content across more platforms: TV, web, and social media. I don't think this is good news for journalists or for the public. Quality reporting, where you're actually getting new information, is much different than parachuting into problems, reporting surface-level facts, and then moving on to the next issue, which is what local reporting is really like in my experience. So reporters are being burdened with more work to do in a given day, but they're not getting compensated all that well for it. The median salary for a reporter job in Canada is just over $60,000 a year. Less in some markets. Yes, you'll make more money if you work in Toronto, Canada's largest market, and experience and news format does play a role, like whether you're on radio or television. I was an on-camera reporter and news anchor in a mid-sized Canadian market, and I'll just say there's a reason why I'm getting my MBA. So we've got a bit of a perfect storm of problems going on. News outlets are facing dwindling revenues. Less revenues means less resources. Less resources means journalists have to do more work, but that comes without a commensurate increase in pay, and that's forcing many, like myself, to leave the industry altogether. And when we leave, sometimes those positions don't get filled again, or newsrooms close altogether. Over the last 15 years, over 450 newsrooms in Canada have shut their doors, impacting over 300 communities across the country, leaving many without a local news outlet to go to. It's the type of resource to not just learn about what's going on in your community, but also to hold local politicians, police forces, or anyone in a position of power to account. A short story here to explain what I mean. When I was working in Winnipeg, an email came into our newsroom inbox. It was from a worker at a children's daycare center. I called the number provided, and they told me their concerns, that kids were being kept in overcrowded rooms without enough adult supervision given the number of kids. Keep in mind, this is in the era of at least some COVID concerns and restrictions. I called the daycare operator. They vehemently denied everything that the worker said. I asked if I could come by and see for myself. They said they'd let me know. I never heard back. I did hear back, though, from the worker involved. In the span of barely a day or two, all the staffing issues and crowding problems were miraculously restored. You would be surprised how often stuff like that happens. Because a call from the media can be surprisingly effective in spooking bad actors into better behavior. And that's the type of resource that communities lose when there is no Canadian news outlet to go to. At the same time, it's also just getting harder to find fact-checked, verified news for basically everybody. Because while the number of paid journalists in Canada is dwindling, the number of social media accounts posting news-related content is only growing. Now, since Meta banned news content on Facebook and Instagram, you'd expect not to really see news content on either of those platforms. Yet search Canada News on Instagram and you'll still get plenty of content. Some of it harmless memes, a lot of it content creators taking one-sided views of the news or political issues, on both sides of the political spectrum. These posts toss aside objectivity to create an emotional reaction in their audience. It's all just clickbait, just taking a different form. The scary part is, people can see this as the news, or fact, because it's made to look like that. So, while content like this is allowed on social media, actual news content is banned. And that is hurting news outlets as well. A study from the Canadian Media Observatory found the meta ban on news drove down total user engagement for news organizations in Canada by 43%, only adding to the problem facing our news organizations, which is dwindling resources and an unsustainable profit model. So, how exactly do we make the news profitable again? And how does the news industry's profitability affect us and the information that we consume every day? Before we get to that, one last question for the audience. Last one, I swear, I'm a recovering journalist, still in the process of recovering, and we like to ask a lot of questions. So here it is. Who here pays for a subscription to the New York Times, to the Wall Street Journal, pays to watch CNN or Bloomberg? We got some hands in the crowd. And who here pays for a Canadian media news outlet? Less hands and just less in general. Why is that? Well, I think it has to do with perception and value. The New York Times and other major outlets have been managed to position themselves as essential sources of news. If you're a truly informed global citizen or someone really keyed into the market, you're willing to pay the $25 a month or however much it costs to get access to their content every month. People are willing to pay for their content, and a subscription model is profitable, at least for these organizations. I don't think a lot of Canadian media outlets are seen the same way. But Michael, you must be saying, we don't have to pay for the news in Canada, we have the CBC. True, except the CBC is also downsizing, faced with the same industry pressures as every other news organization, along with threats of defunding. One of the only Canadian media outlets to show some financial resiliency and growth is the Globe and Mail, largely thanks to a subscription-based model. For the Globe's reporting, people are willing to pay a premium, and the management at the Globe understand this. All that is to say, I think in the modern Canadian media landscape, a subscription-based model is one of the only ones that will truly be sustainable for news organizations. And that means a change of thinking is needed for the news outlets themselves. They should be thinking about how to create content for their audience that's truly valued, truly seen as something essential, that's something that people are willing to pay for. And I think for Canadians, for everyone here, a change in thinking is needed too. How much value do you place on the news? On the effort to present objective fact? Are you willing to pay for quality, in-depth journalism, for stories that go beyond the headlines, that matter to you, that affect change? So as a final thought to everyone here, if you care about the news, if you value it like any other product, maybe you should be willing to pay for it. Thank you.